Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about Andean metalwork for my final in my class Art of the Ancient Americas, and today I'm going to specifically focus on gold and silver metalwork from the Andean period. The reason why I chose gold and silver metalwork was because a lot of our previous cultures we had researched, like the Maya, did not get to focus on a lot of gold pieces because they weren't really prevalent in that culture. They used stones and objects that were more readily available to them, such as the jade that we've seen before in the previous cultures. So I thought that it would be really interesting to focus on gold because it was really prevalent in this chapter. Not in this chapter specifically, but in this book of Art of the Andes, we saw a lot more gold work than we saw from the previous art, so that's why I wanted to focus on it. And so for the first culture that we're actually going to be focusing on, we're going to be focusing back on the Lambayeque culture, and specifically we're going to be talking about the tuning knife. So the Lambayeque culture was a culture in ancient Peru between 750 C and C 1375, and they lived on the north coast of Peru, and like most cultures from ancient Peru and like ancient Mexico, most of them perished due to like natural disasters. So most of them would die off because they would get sick when the conquistadors came, or they would die because there was like a hurricane or a flood. So they were all pretty much natural disasters. So back to the tuning knife. The metal work that we see here is very distinct because the tuning knife isn't like a regular knife that's pointy. It's round at the bottom. It has a very distinct trapezoid shape. So it's not like a regular single knife that's pointy at the bottom. It's round, and the tuning knife actually has a solid purpose. It was used in ceremonies, specifically sacrificial ceremonies. They would sacrifice an animal to the god Inti, which was actually the god of the sun. And a culture before that, before the Lambayeque, would also use the tuning knife for a ceremonial purpose, which was head surgery. So for that surgery, it was supposed to treat disorders in the head, so like headaches and any mental disorders. They thought that by relieving the pressure in the head would get rid of the bad disturbances. So what they would do is that they would cut open the head with the tuning knife, and then they would let it bleed out so that all the bad energy would go away, and then they would plate the head with a piece of gold so that they could seal it, and then the person was supposed to be better after that. And besides the tuning knife, something else that I learned that was really interesting was the people of Peru actually adopted the tuning knife as a symbol of good luck. So now Peruvians actually hang a tuning knife in their house, which reflects good luck to them, which I thought was pretty interesting. I feel like there's always something interesting when you're doing research. So the next culture that we're actually going to talk about is the Mochi. So specifically we're going to be talking about the Lower Simpon tomb. So the Mochi culture is also another culture that had very distinct Andean art. It had beautiful gold and metal work. The Mochi culture was a culture in Peru that lived in the Chicama and Trujillo valleys, I think that's how you say it, between 1 CE and 800 CE. The Mochi territory is actually split linguistically, and both areas were very different artistically, and in architect too, they had different trends, but we can still see their beautiful goldwork when we look at the tombs. They had a vast majority of gold and silver, which we know was probably used to represent power. And when we look at the first tomb, which is the Lord of Sumpun, we can see right away the different gold works. Specifically, an item that I focused on were the earpieces, and they caught my eye because there was so many of them, and they're really bright in color. They used really bright blue, and I just thought that they were really beautiful. And actually this earpiece is supposed to depict the Lord of Sumpun himself getting ready for war, which I thought was pretty cool because it's like a reminder of himself and like of who he was, like when the people were looking at the tomb. And from doing my research, I actually found out that before gold was actually used to establish power, people would get buried with gold. Before, it was just seen as like a really like precious object, so people would get buried with gold before it was even used as like to resonate with power, which I thought was pretty cool because we know that it's been prevalent in their culture for a while. And then the next culture after the Mochi culture is the Inca. So I know we didn't get to touch upon the Inca in the last chapter because we focused more on the Mochi and the other ones. But today we are going to talk about the Inca. So another Andean culture that had very significant metalwork and goldwork was the Inca. Not much goldwork, but more silverwork. And the Inca first appeared in modern-day southeastern Peru in the 12th century ADE. And like according to original myths, they were actually created by the sun god Inti. Inti, which we know from the previous culture that the god Inti is actually pretty prevalent in most Andean cultures. So we can see the way their silverwork played a huge part in their culture was because it was used a lot in ceremonies. So specifically this object here, it's called the cast silver figure, and it's dressed in like really beautiful textiles and like a headpiece. But something interesting was it was actually used in child sacrifices. So the children used in these sacrifices, they were like specifically picked. They had to be 6 to 10 years old, and they were like perfectly selected to walk to Cusco, and then they'd be presented to the king where they would like marry one another. So they would marry the king, and then they would be sent off to like their burial site where they would actually be buried with another very distinct piece that we talked about earlier, which was this llama. And they would be buried with like this llama and other little pieces of goldwork that we've seen before. So I think that's like pretty interesting that these two goldworks actually go together. And this llama is actually, I think it's called like an honorary llama or a royal llama. So it's like a really big prevalent part of their culture. And I know that we haven't really talked about human sacrifice since like the past culture, so like in the last book. So I thought it was interesting that it came back up in the Andean culture. So if you guys have any questions on this final, I hope you guys can comment them. This was my final, and I talked about gold and silverwork specifically in the Andean culture because we didn't get to see it a lot in the past cultures, and I thought that it was really cool how it just kind of popped up out of nowhere, and we saw how it represented human sacrifice, it represented power, it represented wealth, and we saw that when we looked at the Inca culture, how it represented human sacrifice. We saw when we looked at the Mochi culture how it represented power, and we saw when we looked at the Lampia culture how it also represented a ceremony, which is actually a pretty interesting ceremony because I didn't know before that they would do a surgery to relieve bad pressure. So I thought that was really cool. I hope you guys enjoyed learning these facts as much as I did. Thank you.